Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape Podcast. Hosted by Dr. Holly Krutka, Executive Director of the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. The show highlights SER's role supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development for the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back, listeners. Today, I'm really excited to hear from some special guests to talk about a really exciting technology and really the process of innovation. So we're going to hear about a real success story. It started with a center of excellence supported by the School of Energy Resources here at the University of Wyoming. And it started with a research problem that was very specific to Wyoming's needs. And today, this research has now grown and spun off into a company into a company that, as far as we know, has gained the highest investment from the private sector of any energy-related spinoff from the University of Wyoming. So it's a great example of what can be accomplished and great example of the type of innovation that can happen when you fund the brilliant minds here at the University of Wyoming. So welcome to both our guests. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Mike Urynowicz. I'm a professor at the University of Wyoming and the director for the Center for Biogenic Natural Gas Research.
Yep, and I'm Ryan Waddington. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cowboy Clean Fuels.
Perfect, thanks. So we're going to get into all the details around the technology and the company, but I think first we have to tackle some background. So we're going to start with CBM, which stands for coal bed methane. It is an industry that started, and I think to understand the whole story, the innovation, why this investment was made, the opportunity that your company has, we have to start there. So first, what does CBM or coal bed methane refer to?
Yeah, coal bed methane is methane that is adsorbed into coal seams. And this really is a Wyoming story because in the Powder River Basin, there's just a tremendous amount of coal bed methane that was locked away very deep in the coal. And people in the state figured out how to dewater those coal seams and desorb the gas. So it really is a Wyoming story that goes back several decades.
So when we talk about the Powder River Basin and coal, a lot of people are going to think about our coal mines that are surface mines. They're incredible. They're 50 feet thick in some places of coal. That's actually not what you're talking about, though.
It's those same seams, but much deeper. So as you go across the basin, the Powder River Basin, those seams get deeper and deeper. So this is coal that would not be mineable. It wouldn't be economic to actually mine this coal because of its depth, but it does hold this natural gas adsorbed to the coal. And you can kind of imagine it being trapped on the surface under pressure, hydrostatic pressure. So what we developed in the state in the late 80s and early 90s was the approach where you dewater those coal seams and create a different equilibrium. And as a result, that methane that was adsorbed onto the surface of the coal desorbs after you produce water for a period of time.
Great. So when did this industry of trying to get that natural gas or methane off of this deep underground coal, when did that kind of really take off and what we'll call an energy boom? When did that happen?
Late 1990s, and it was about a 10-year boom where over the course of those 10 years, literally billions of dollars of infrastructure was constructed to collect coal bed methane in the Powder River Basin. We're talking about upwards of about 30,000 wells, a lot of operators, and a tremendous amount of gas that was recovered as well. But what happened at the end of that, the late 2000s, is that's when hydraulic fracturing started to come on. And as a result, the natural gas prices fell significantly. So I think they got up as high as maybe $15 or $16 dollars an MCF, and then dropped down to about $4. And now we're their gas prices are even lower than that. So it went from a very economical play to one that wasn't very economical very quickly as hydraulic fracturing started to come online.
And the Powder River Basin really saw kind of a double whammy with hydraulic fracturing because the really low, historically low natural gas prices, which are continuing today, hit our coal bed methane and our coal at the same time. So that's when it busted. So we have our boom and bust cycle in that energy sector. So let's talk a little bit about the technology around biogenic methane. So we'll get back to like the business economic side, but let's dive a little bit more into the science. So we're going to stick with you Dr. Urynowicz. So how does Wyoming coal make natural gas?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people don't realize this, that the natural gas in the Powder River Basin is what's called secondary biogenic. So it was made through microbial processes over millennia. And the coal there is what the microorganisms have been using to produce the natural gas. So that's their feedstock. So there's also thermogenic gas, which is not biogenic. And for decades, we thought that most of the coal bed methane, most of the natural gas was thermogenic gas. And as we've been able to look at that gas differently through isotopic analysis, we've been able to show that it's actually biogenic in nature. A lot of these plays where we thought that the gas was thermogenic actually turns out to be biogenic. And when I got to the university in 2002, the boom was kind of in its heyday. And what was an issue was produced water. They were producing a lot of water to dewater that coal bed methane. So that's how I got started. I started looking at produced water. Produced water, as you move across the basin, the salinity gets higher. It has a high sodium absorption ratio. So that really got me started looking at the Powder River Basin, looking at coal bed methane, and then coming to the realization that because this gas is being produced microbially, we can produce it real time.
So, and I think that understanding of how the gas is produced is really important for what we're going to talk about later. So it's really, I've never heard that story. So it's really interesting how that's kind of how you got into this whole area, or one of the founding areas that you studied. So how did then the Center for Biogenic Gas Research start? Was it after the bust?
It was kind of at the end of the boom.
At the end of the boom?
Yeah, yep. In fact, we've been around now for 15 years, almost as long as the School of Energy Resources. We started, I think, in 2009, and with the idea that if we could look at technologies that would make the coal more bioavailable. So that's actually the first patent through the center, was basically how do you solubilize, depolymerize the coal so that it's more readily bioavailable to the microorganisms. And that's really the whole concept that led to the center being founded in 2009.
Okay, and so there was already infrastructure that was starting to be created, all this investment in wells and pipelines in the Powder River Basin. So it was to tackle a Wyoming-specific problem that the center was kind of stood up. Is that right?
It really was, yeah. It was the opportunity to look at ways to create more gas and new gas through microbial enhancement.
And so let's talk about how the technology works. So you're trying to create new gas that wasn't there before, but you actually have to take another step to do that, right? So how does the technology work?
Well, as I mentioned, initially, we were really focused on the coal, making the coal more bioavailable. But then I think we came to the realization early on that really the value in the Powder River Basin wasn't necessarily the coal as a feedstock for the microorganisms. It was the coal from the standpoint that's where the microorganisms live, and we can basically decouple the microbial action from the coal, which is a fossil fuel, if we provide an alternative feedstock. So that happened early on, maybe I think maybe 2010, 2011. We started to come to the realization that the real value in the Powder River Basin is looking at it as a geobioreactor. That now it's instrumented with wells, pipeline, compressors, and so we have access to it, but we can really look at it now from the standpoint of almost like an above ground anaerobic digester, but it's because it's below ground, the scale is just immense, right? So where we started to pivot was with respect to feedstock. We no longer looked at the coal from the standpoint of a feedstock or substrate for the microorganisms. We looked at alternative feedstocks that are biomass derived. So when you think about that, the carbon cycle, right? Where rather than producing enhanced fossil-based gas, we were able to produce carbon negative renewable natural gas.
And I think this is really interesting because we talk a lot about the process of innovation and innovative technologies, and the fact you went into this, you knew about some specific problems in Wyoming geology and maybe some opportunities, but then through this research process, it led you down a different road. And so you had to start injecting some sort of feedstock that would eventually, at least some of the carbon in that would be converted to gas, to renewable natural gas. So what happened? What did you try?
Yeah, well, what we first did was we looked at the coal, and we looked at biomethane potential from the coal treatments. But then actually the first experiment that we did after that was we looked at a whole different suite of sugars, 5 and 6 carbon sugars. And we used the coal actually as an inoculum.
And what does that mean?
It means it's where the microorganisms live.
Yeah.
So we used the coal to add the microorganisms. And back then there was a lot of interest in okay, what's the effect on the coal as a result of these microbial enhancements? So we looked at the energy value of the coal at the beginning, and then after the microorganisms started to use the sugar as a feedstock, and we looked at biogas production, but what we found was that the energy value of the coal before and after really didn't change much. So the microorganisms shifted immediately to the readily available sugars and didn't really affect the coal at all.
So, let me make sure I understand this. So coal, the deep underground coal, it did create methane using these microorganisms, or I should say it the other way around. The microorganisms created methane or natural gas from coal, but it took a long time, millions of years.
Yeah.
Then you, through your process of innovation, just tried to inject sugars and see what would happen in those microorganisms, much like even humans preferred sugar to other things, and focused on that and converted this feedstock that you put in there. But the coal was still important in that that's kind of where these microorganisms live. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
For the longest time, we looked at coal, from a combustion standpoint as an energy source. Really, what I think the innovation, kind of what the realization was, well, it doesn't have to be an energy source. It can be a place where the microorganisms live. It can be a place where we store carbon dioxide, which is another big part of what we're doing with Cowboy. Not only are we producing renewable natural gas, but we're also sequestering CO2 because the microorganisms produce both. They produce CO2 and methane. So I think that was really the innovation, was looking at coal differently.
And so you know, we actually very much still look at coal for combustion here at the School of Energy Resources. But for this process, you really stumbled onto something that has a lot of value in the marketplace. So as you went through this process of innovation and looking at this new area, what role did having a center of excellence play for you?
Yeah, that was really critical. I think we did get some startup money from the School of Energy Resources to really collect preliminary data, do the early research that led to grants where we were able to fund future research. It really was a catalyst to getting us to where we are today with this commercial opportunity with Cowboy Clean Fuels.
But then you hosted the big international meeting, right?
Yeah, that in 2012, actually, so that's when we were starting to look at coal differently and starting to look at ways to, again, kind of decouple the gas production from the coal itself. SCR sponsored, and it was the first international conference on secondary biogenic natural gas, first ever. And we had researchers from all over the world, India, Pakistan, Europe, Australia. It really was kind of the start of this whole idea of basically looking at coal seams as geobioreactors and places where microorganisms can produce renewable natural gas, and you can also sequester carbon. So that really was the catalyst, I think, for also putting this research on a kind of a national level and international level. In fact, we're collaborating now with a lot of those researchers from across the world. I just was in contact with one of the folks who was here from Pakistan just the other week. So.
But you did the Nature Communications paper right after that too, right?
We did. It took a little while to publish that, but actually the keynote talk that I gave for that conference was focused on that research. Yeah.
Okay, Ryan, so you've been mostly quiet. So let's start to talk about when this kind of transitioned from research, although very applied research focused on some Wyoming-specific issues and investment in the state. When did that process start? I mean, we have something here. This is marketable. We need to spin this off. When did you come into the picture?
Actually, fairly early on. So my background before doing this has been 25 years as an energy tech investor.
Okay.
We, this activity kind of overlapped even early in that time period. When Michael referred to the initial attempt to look at, how the microbes, could be encouraged to convert the coal resource faster, and the work that he was doing on that. There were a couple companies that were trying to do that commercially, and those companies, were raising money in the market, and I was aware of them. And so I started to pay attention to that. And then, so we had connected because we went to graduate school together 25 years ago. So we knew each other.
You already knew each other.
Yeah, and we stayed in touch mostly to go on fishing trips together, not so much to do business together. But it's important. But when the business overlaps, that's just that much better. So early on we started talking about this, and then every once in a while we just kind of stay in touch. And I think the initial thought that Michael had as he kept working towards different applications and different technologies that were patented was, how can we license this out, right? And so he would give me a call and say, hey, I think I've got someone that might be interested in licensing this or partnering with us. And so I would jump in and just give my commercial perspective on how that might work. So that was probably, I would say, the first 7 or 8 years of our interaction on this as the technology development and innovation process was going. And then he was continuing to do work, and around, I think it was right at the end of 2019, he gave me a call and said, I've had some really good results in the field, and it's time to talk about what we might do with this again. So give me a call. So, I did, and, described to me what the latest, state of the technology was. And the world had changed, by, 2020, right? From 2012 or 2013. Mm-hmm. And so we looked at it and said, there still might be an opportunity just to license this. But honestly, what you've got here in particular with the CO2 sequestration angle, to me, said that this is really, really compelling, more compelling than I had thought it was in the past. And so, we started to look at it closely and said, we need to build a company around this. This is too big of an opportunity to not build a company around it and just to say, let's go license it out to someone and hope they commercialize it, because you can't ever really control whether it makes it to market if you just license it out. And so to us, it was just too compelling not to move forward. And so that's when we started to build a small team around it and started to move forward a business plan and think about some angel financing and all that. And that's been the journey that we've been on the last, almost 5 years now.
And let's define, what's the largest, you're talking about field testing, what's the largest test that you've had that you saw and you were like, okay, we have something here, we're ready to take this to kind of the more commercial side?
You can talk about it. It was that 2019 test. You did 2 wells and
Yep. It was really a proof of concept initially, where we just wanted to show that you could supply molasses desugarized solubles, which is a byproduct of the sugar beet to sugar refining process, and just show that the microorganism would produce gas in situ. So, and we were able to do that and actually able to differentiate the gas from the existing gas, which is really critical for this technology, because it's the new gas that has really the environmental attributes that give it a lot more value than the existing CBM.
And let's talk about that, because we've mentioned it a couple times. So this also will be producing, if you have any kind of production in a well, there's still residual fossil methane that will come up. Mm-hmm. What you are producing, though, is created from agricultural waste.
Right.
And so that would be like a biogas. How do you tell the difference?
Yeah, it's through carbon-14 analysis, which gives us a percent modern carbon as far as the fraction of that gas stream, and that's directly attributed, whatever that percent is the percent of our new gas.
So that's a very standard test?
Very standard, yeah.
So Ryan, why is that important?
Well, because the value of the renewable natural gas in the marketplace is significantly higher than any other natural gas, including fossil coal bed methane.
Yeah, just natural gas prices are really bad.
Yeah.
Right now.
It's not great.
It's not good.
We've all seen much higher, and honestly, and we were talking about it earlier, this run we've been on at these $2 to $3 prices is longer than I think anybody would have thought and liked. But the value of the renewable natural gas is really decoupled from that. As companies are decarbonizing and looking for ways to do that can't be solved by solar and wind, the value of renewable methane in the marketplace is high and staying there. And so for us, the key is to be able to differentiate the background fossil CBM from the renewable natural gas so that we can go to market with a clear case that this is truly renewable natural gas. Because RNG is a market, it's a niche market, but it's very, very well established today, but it's basically all landfill projects and anaerobic digesters that are at dairy farms. And so the market's used to those two kind of technology pathways. And so we show up and we say, hey, we've got RNG as well, but we do it in a totally different way. And so there's some skepticism as to whether it really is the same. And so it's important for us to be able to make that clear delineation to make sure that there's market acceptance.
And so what do you think? You've mentioned, there is other RNG, renewable natural gas out there. What do you think kind of your scale limitations are? Like, let's start, for example, with the feedstock. So what are your initial sources of feedstock you're looking at using?
Yeah, as Michael mentioned, molasses from sugar beet refining is where we're starting today.
Which we have in Wyoming.
We do. And that's one of the main reasons why that's where we're starting. Michael did a lot of work in the lab on different feedstocks, different renewable carbon-based feedstocks that would work, and a number of things work, but molasses made the most sense because it works really well and because it's available in abundance all around us.
There's some situations that are like a win-win-win.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting one because it actually is something that helps our Wyoming ag sector. So they've been really interested in supportive and working with you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a market that has been important to Wyoming and the surrounding states for a long time, but it's also one that hasn't been growing a lot. The processing has been getting more efficient. It's a very regulated market. It's a protected market, and so there's not an opportunity to grow like some other agricultural markets. And so it's been challenging for growers. And so we come on the scene and we talk about utilizing either the fraction that we're using today, which is molasses, or potentially more of the beet. Thinking about the beet essentially as an energy crop. And what that leads to is a real growth opportunity in the market that they haven't seen in a long, long time. So there's an opportunity for growers to produce more than their quotas that are put forth on them by their co-ops or by the federal government, and really do more. And in a business model that results in energy production that's carbon negative, right? So that's gonna be durable and resident in this new energy economy that we're working our way into.
And it'll give us access to some markets that we don't currently have access to as a state.
Yeah.
So what do you think your limiting factor? Let's say there's a lot of success. Is your limiting factor the wells, or is it the amount of agricultural feedstock, or is it the markets? Let's just say you're wildly successful. What could slow you down?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's different things at different times. So right now there's the situation in the Powder with CBM, with that infrastructure that was built out, because it's at the end of the play, the end of the economically recoverable CBM. There's a lot of wells that are being decommissioned, plugged and abandoned. The utilities out there pulling down wires and meters because there's nobody using electricity, and so it's not a situation where the microbes are going away. They're there. They've been there for eons. They'll continue to be there. But all the other infrastructure that we leverage, won't be there forever if we don't move quickly. So for us, our goal is to grow, as fast as we can to access more wellbores, more leases, more acreage to be able to scale up. Eventually, and not too far off, we will run into some constraints with regard to the existing feedstock that we're using, which again is molasses or desugarized molasses. We're a ways from that. We're several years away from that, but of course we are thinking big, and we're thinking the same question that you're asking. And so we're looking at, ways that, again, as I mentioned earlier, we can use more of the beet as feedstock. And if we have some work ongoing with the National Renewable Energy Lab, there's additional work that Michael's working on in his lab here that's aligned with that, to see if we can use a bigger fraction. If we can prove that out, it's going to be a game changer, because then we will not be limited by the current feedstock that's available, and we could potentially scale up to being a significant percentage of the total Powder River Basin area for CBM.
Do you have any estimates or goals of the amount of natural gas you'd like to produce?
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens, right? But,
yes.
But so forward-looking statements, right? But our projections are that our current project is about 140 wells, about 12,000 acres. We believe that we can produce potentially as much as about 0.7 BCF per year of gas, of renewable natural gas from that.
Wow.
So, not saying we can do this, but the whole of the Powder, I think, is about 15 million acres. So you could think about scaling it up several orders of magnitude above that without running into the need to go anywhere outside of Wyoming to do this. So, we're thinking that big. It's going to take us maybe a decade to get there, but we don't see, if we can break through with the feedstock, we don't see a real limit to how big this could be.
And now you have a good start. You've had some recent success with fundraising. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you feel about where you stand in terms of kind of getting the resources you need to start making progress towards your goals?
Right, and that's another constraint, right? You've got the acreage, you've got the feedstock. Capital is a real one as well for any startup company. We've been I think very successful, as you mentioned, in getting to this point. We've raised about $20 million in dilutive equity capital. It's all essentially from individuals and family offices who, a lot of whom have an energy background, many of whom are Wyoming folks or have businesses in Wyoming, some in Texas and Houston as well, but a lot of people who really kind of get what we're doing. Yeah. We also were able to kind of leverage that into a WEA Energy Matching Funds grant of about $8 million to add on to that.
Wyoming Energy Authority.
Wyoming Energy Authority, thank you. And we really appreciate that program. It came for us along at the perfect time to help really facilitate our Series B financing, which was essentially $18 million total, $10 million of private capital, and that $8 million. And that's what's catapulting us forward right now. We will have to raise more capital for sure, and in particular when we scale up, when we go to the next couple projects. But we're in really good shape right now in terms of proving out commercially that this works. We're nearing offtake agreements, so essentially, generating revenue from the production of the RNG and the carbon removal credits, which we haven't talked about yet, but that's another real economic opportunity for us. And once we can do that, essentially, I think it looks like any other proven energy company that's just scaling up with a new technology. So, and the great thing for us and for Wyoming is that, as I mentioned earlier, we can be very busy right here in Wyoming for a long time. We don't need to go anywhere else.
And there's so much infrastructure. Think about how long it takes to build.
Yeah.
Get permitting. I mean, you probably will still need permitting, but at least the wells are there, there's pipelines, and as long as they don't remove the electricity and other things, there's so much infrastructure. So it's really exciting. And I think the other thing that's so exciting is that we were able to provide a little seed funding. The university is able to have incredible people like Michael. Yep. And now it's leading to this huge potential outcome for the state and already investment in Wyoming and working with our ag sector. Mm-hmm. It's just such a cool story. So I appreciate you telling it. And this is really going to be hard for you to answer since Michael's sitting right here. But I think, we've had faculty on this podcast quite a few times. And I actually remember Dr. Todd Allen, he's from the University of Michigan. He's focused on nuclear. And he said something about how faculty are really focused on making sure everything's perfect.
Yep.
And delivering perfect outcomes. But from the story you two are telling me, maybe that wasn't as much, Michael, or tell me what it's like to come from the commercial sector and investing and work with a faculty member to get a new technology kind of stood up and commercialized.
Well, I think we do have an advantage here because we've known each other for a long time.
The fishing and college and fishing.
And going to, we got our master's degree, together. And so, went through some of those same experiences at the same time.
What was your master's in?
Well, we both got a master's in civil environmental engineering.
Okay.
University of Wisconsin. So another UW. But
okay.
So we did that. So we've known each other for a long time, and that really helped. And in addition, like I mentioned earlier, Michael called me from time to time to be helpful on this. Going back almost a decade. So we had basis of a kind of a working arrangement, and we kind of knew how each other, worked. But I will say that the last 5 years, it's been different. As building a company together is different than just dropping in and saying, hey, you should think about your license agreement this way, right? And it's like any startup, it's been a series of challenges that we've worked through. But it really helps to have a faculty member or a researcher who has a commercial mindset, right? So I spent his majority of his career in academia focusing on teaching and focusing on research and publishing and all that. But he has a commercial mindset and understands that it can't always be the perfect solution, right? Sometimes it's got to be good enough, right? And not everything is going to be, buttoned up to the level that you would need to get a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And so it's working because we know each other and have for such a long time, and because he has a commercial mindset that's maybe different than what you find in some other professors and academics.
Yeah, and in the last 2 years, being a part of this startup with Ryan, I've learned a lot about what it takes to really commercialize these technologies. And as a researcher, you are really focused on just the basic R&D, and you don't usually have that opportunity to think about anything beyond that. But this has just been an incredible opportunity. We've been working on this, Ryan and I both, for a long time, and it's just to see it come to fruition over the last couple of years, it's just makes the research even that much more exciting for me.
Mm-hmm. Great. A couple more questions. So folks have heard, listeners may have heard, there's been a lot of boom and bust cycles, obviously, in natural gas. Prices are just terrible some of the time in the last few years. And so they've heard about different technologies try to come into the Powder River Basin and try to leverage some of the CBM. So I think you've talked a lot about the novelty of this technology. Is there anything you want to add why anyone who hears about Cowboy Clean Fuels versus some other technology, how it's different, and why you think you have a pathway or a runway to success? And maybe start with you, Michael.
Well, I think there's several things that really makes this technology different and novel. I mean, it really is a Wyoming-focused technology. I think the Powder River Basin is a resource in the state that has incredible potential. And, of course, we've had the CBM play, but again, thinking differently. It's about the size of Lake Erie. It's got coal seams that are up to 100 meters thick, and that coal can adsorb carbon dioxide at a 4 to 5x greater than the methane. So if we look at that coal differently, that Powder River Basin differently, and we think of it from a carbon management standpoint now, I mean, where we actually are managing carbon in the atmosphere, and we need to sequester it, right, to manage or try to control some of the effects of climate change. It's an incredible resource, and our technology does that. It's not only do we produce renewable natural gas, but we also sequester carbon, and we do it in situ through natural microbial processes. And there's, as far as I'm aware, there's really no other technology that does that.
Yeah, no, that's really critical. We participate in two markets, right? In energy markets and renewable natural gas, and also these emerging carbon markets with carbon removal. And there's most companies, if not every company in those markets, is kind of a one-trick pony, right? That's the only thing they do. And as Michael just described, we do both. And so when you think about risk mitigation and how to navigate markets that are always changing, to have a couple different ways to win is really, really important and very, very unique. So I think that's one thing that really differentiates us. That's really, really important. So yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. So this is a new technology, and it's kind of a new way to maybe create renewable natural gas, but the markets that you're going to reach are established. And you might have to do work to make sure that your technology gets entrance into those markets. Right. But I think there's a lot of science behind that. But these markets do exist. This is not some future idea.
Absolutely. And the other thing I was going to mention is just timing is so important in any business, and certainly in the startup world. And I've lived that for 25 years as an investor. If you can invest in the right idea, but if it's not the right time, it won't be successful. And the timing couldn't be better for what we're doing. Both the RNG market, which has emerged in recent years, but not that long ago. It's to the point where it's matured, and there are established buyers out there, and no one questions what it really is. And then on the carbon side, the carbon credit markets have been around, but they've been pretty kind of low quality and low value. But what's emergent just in the last few years is much more high quality, high value credit markets for carbon removal. And that's essentially what we do. And so the timing just couldn't be better. We don't produce RNG and remove carbon because we are trying to chase markets, right? That's what the technology does.
Right.
And it just happens that we're bringing it to market and making it commercial at the exact time that these markets are willing to accept it. And so, timing you just can't plan for, but when it's in your favor, it really, really helps. And that's what we're seeing right now.
That's really exciting. We're going to be so excited to watch as this moves forward, and make sure to keep folks aware of what's going on. So if someone wants to learn more about Cowboy Clean Fuels or the technology, where should they go?
Yeah, website is the best place, cowboycleanfuels.com.
Easy.
Easy, very easy. We're in the process of rebuilding that, so there's kind of a placeholder there, but there's some info sheets to download. There's kind of explainers on RNG and on CDR, carbon dioxide removal, as well as the technology kind of background, and a little video, cool little 2-minute animated video that we did a year or so ago that describes everything in a very, very clever way. So that's the best place to go. We have some other socials, but the website's the best place to go.
Perfect. So for our last question, we like to switch gears a little and ask about something different. And so we always ask, what is your favorite place to visit in Wyoming? Michael, let's start with you. I mean, I live here, but
I'd like to start with Ryan, because I think it might be the same place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Ryan, we're starting with you.
It's so hard to choose, but Michael and I like to fish, and we fished on the Wind River. He took me down there, and I caught the biggest brown that I've ever caught in my life. And for a while, it was the biggest brown that either one of us had caught. but I think he outdid me recently. So,
well, and then my son recently outdid.
Well, nobody can compete with your son. He's the best fisherman. Either of us know, probably will always be. But yeah, I mean, Wyoming, the whole state, and I describe this to everybody that I meet, it's so beautiful all around. I mean, everybody knows Jackson and they know the Tetons, but there's so much that the state has to offer. And when you love the outdoors and you love to fish like we do and hunt, there's no place better.
Right. Michael?
Yeah, that was the place.
Same place.
Same place.
Except when you caught the fish.
Well, he did outfish me that day. But yeah, there's so many places like that throughout the state. But the Wind River Canyon is really special.
Great.
Yep.
Well, thank you both so much for working with us at the School of Energy Resources. We're continuing to engage with you. Really excited where it goes. We're going to be so excited to watch Cowboy Clean Fuels and where you go from there, and just appreciate you doing the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us,
Sally. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.